This workshop is part of a larger series aimed at helping education innovators explore how AI can advance K-12 literacy. So we are looking at applications of AI across different realms and domains, and we're excited about the possibilities of AI, not simply because it's the new brand new shiny toy in the room, but because we believe there are ways to leverage AI that is grounded in the research evidence of how to effectively teach or how students effectively learn, but in ways that can allow us to implement promising AI literacy tools, create personalized reading intervention strategies, and design inclusive literacy programs with an eye towards struggling readers. As Agüeda mentioned, I'm a research director at the Learning Agency, and I'm grateful that the Learning Agency, TLA for short, is doing this in collaboration with Innovate US and the Burns Center for Social Change's Equitable Literacy Initiative. So if we're going to think about, okay, what are we hoping to learn and analyze and discuss over these next 54 minutes, possibly, there are three main objectives in mind. One is for us to really get to understand what makes large language models, or what I'll call LLMs for short, so promising, so effective, and so groundbreaking in how they're able to produce human-like language. Then we'll start to talk a little bit more about the applications when it comes to generating personalized reading prompts and interactive discussion frameworks for students and for teachers as well to guide their instructional practice. As we're analyzing these best practices, exploring different real world tools and products that are currently on the market, we also want to make sure we have a practical conversation about these applications, keeping an eye both toward the strengths as well as the limitations. Because even though we have come a long way in what these language models can do, we also want to be sure that we're aware of the limitations so that when it comes to adopting these tools in practice or monitoring them, we have the right lens and the right framework to check that they're truly enhancing literacy outcomes. So let's maybe take a step back and let's think about the evolution of language models, where it started from and where we're at currently in the history or timeline of AI and language models. So in the beginning, if you wanted to program a machine agent and artificial intelligence to understand things, people, objects in the real world, there was a very basic approach. In traditional programming, you would have to program a very specific set of rules through code so the machine could understand that real world phenomenon. So for example, if you wanted to have a machine understand a cat, you would have to type and code very specific rules. Like if you see an animal with four legs and two ears who goes meow, then that is a cat. And as you can imagine, although that can help the machine develop a basic level of intelligence about cats, there isn't enough information, there isn't enough rich data, and there isn't enough nuance for that computer machine to perform highly intelligent tasks related to cats. So that was the traditional programming around the time of the 50s, 60s, all well through the 90s, really. But then, due to advancements in software and hardware, there are new innovations in scientific techniques, mathematical approaches to algorithmic design and modeling. You have this new wave of programming machines to understand these real world objects and phenomena. In this diagram here, that is called the wave of neural networks, where basically, due to the advancements of computing and being able to feed these machines massive amounts of data sets and have these machines process the information in those data sets as if they had a human brain through these artificial neural networks. So they're taking all of these images or texts or audio files and they're processing that information systematically through layers, through interconnected networks, as if they had a human brain, so that they can extract patterns about what makes a cat really a cat. And so now you've gone from these very rule-based codes to understand a cat to a sophisticated and robust learning process of artificial neural networks. And so this allows the possibilities of understanding real world phenomena and having human-like reasoning even more promising. Now we get to large language models and generative language models, which are still based fundamentally on these neural network architectures. But again, due to advancements in software and hardware and mathematical approaches, you can consider the language model to have a database, almost like a huge library of information, maybe millions upon millions of data points on cats. And with that database of cats, ranging from, it could be stories about cats, it could be narratives about cats, it could be discussion forum posts about cats, it's able to understand cats in different contexts, in different documents, and in different communication styles, so that when you ask it a question, it not only understands cats and can reason about cats, but it can also generate natural language text about cats. And that's kind of the new era we're in now in thinking about language models. These computer machines who have this extensive knowledge base, a common knowledge about vast amounts of topics and people and events that have been scraped off of the internet. And they've been able to understand the relationships and patterns between these different words and concepts and phenomena. And now they can reason, understand, and generate natural language with humans. That's what makes them really, really exciting. And if we're thinking about how that is happening in tandem with the evolution of personalization, personalized learning, as I'm sure you all are aware of, is something that is grounded in the research evidence of the science of learning. There are so many benefits of personalized learning in increasing student engagement, increasing student motivation, and also increasing academic outcomes. And so if we're thinking about the relationship between AI and personalization, or AI and personalized learning, during the 1990s, the idea of personalization was very basic. It really came down to a search engine. So the personalized experience of learning was you entering into the toolbar or the text box, I want to look for this book, or I want to look for this instructional material. And in these very static user actions is how you experience personalization. But again, there are advancements in machine learning, advancements in neural networks, where now you have other approaches or innovations for personalizing a user's experience based on data of their behavior and interests in the past. So as an example, a recommender system, if you think about Netflix, right? What made Netflix pretty cool was that it could recommend movies to watch based on historical data of movies you've watched in the past. So because we see in your history, you tend to like these movies, we can find other users that have similar watching behavior and make recommendations based on that data. So due to advancements in filtering through this information, looking at user behavior, looking at the features of the actual content items that users are engaging with and liking, you have these machine agents that can make predictions on what that user would best like or what is best suited for their needs. This continues to become more sophisticated in its capabilities as advancements in AI continue to grow, with deep learning, with neural networks, as I mentioned in the past. What makes this time especially exciting is now we're bringing in large language models into the picture. So whereas in the 1990s and the 2000s, you were using these recommender systems that would look at data sets of user behavior with these very specific data points, now you have these large language models that transform personalization because they can actually engage with the user through conversation. Now, through a chatbot interface, you can directly ask, what do you like? What do you need? What are you struggling with? And so, whereas before you had to go through a lot of engineering approaches and machine learning predictions to understand the next best move for a learner, because of large language models and because of the natural language interfaces that are now emerging because of language models, we're able to get data in real time through conversational inputs and outputs. Personalization is now seen as a conversation and content creation. So now here, we're able to merge or converge on those 2 points. We have the evolution of AI, we have the evolution of language models, and we also have the evolution of personalization, as all of these things are continuing to advance in their technological and machine capabilities, right? And so we recognize that there are both promises and risks with this new era that we're in. And so we wanted to spend a few minutes just to cover a little bit more deeply what makes personalizing reading comprehension with LLMs so groundbreaking and so revolutionary, but also what are some things to keep in mind to make sure that if we are adopting these approaches and these tools in practice, we are mitigating the risks that come along with it. So first, let's talk about probably the most obvious strength to using large language models and personalizing reading comprehension, and that is the natural language interface. What made ChatGPT so incredibly groundbreaking was you could directly interact with it through that chatbot interface. You could type, you could craft a prompt, you could give it instructions and get that immediate response. So before, the only way to interact with these large language models would be someone who had that engineering background to program code. But now the user, the consumer, can directly interact with that language model and give it personalization instructions through natural language text. And that makes it really exciting. Also, if we're thinking about the multilingual capabilities of these large language models, the fact that they're not only trained on English, they can be trained on other foreign languages, from popular languages like Spanish and French to low resource languages, if you're thinking about minority languages on the sub-Saharan African continent, for instance. So the capabilities are really broadened in terms of personalization with these language models. However, because of that, if we're thinking about something like accessibility, large language models still require internet connectivity, still require access to high resource devices. There can be the risk of a digital divide. If we're thinking about accessibility, if we're thinking about equity, although these models are more accessible than ever before, there are some limitations because they still require high-tech resources. If we're also thinking about the lens of equity and thinking about ways in which we can hold the tension between the strengths and limitations, one promise is that because these large language models have these natural language interfaces, the chance of increasing engagement and motivation from struggling readers, particularly those from historically marginalized backgrounds, increases because now the learning experience becomes more dynamic. It becomes more of a real-time conversation, not just with the teacher in the classroom, but now with this chatbot interface. And that learner can directly input their needs, what they're struggling with within that interface, within that chatbot or natural language interface. However, there are some limitations, and you'll see that the developers of large language models often put out a disclaimer. These large language models do have a risk of bias. They are trained on real-world data, which often reflects real-world societal biases. So there is a chance that what that language model is generating reflects these real-world biases, can be discriminatory, can be prejudicial, and can amplify harm to historically marginalized students. Also, because these large language models are learning from the data that they're fed, if they're not given enough data that adequately represents these historically underrepresented or historically marginalized learners, they won't be able to better understand the specific needs and the specific challenges that those learners have. In terms of efficiency, again, one of the huge selling points of AI is efficiency. You get that real-time feedback. You get that real-time conversation. However, there is a cost. These models are huge. They're computationally expensive. They do tax the environment in a lot of ways. So these are just some things to keep in mind as well. If we're thinking about context-aware analysis, sorry if that term is a little bit jargony, but what makes this area of large language models so exciting for personalized reading comprehension is what a lot of us may love about, I don't know if you're a pro Chat GPT fan or a Gemini fan, is this idea that even if you write 3 paragraphs, 5 paragraphs, you upload 5 documents. Somehow, some way, that chatbot was able to retain a lot of information to produce a relevant output. And that is the area of research and development called context-aware analysis. How do we lengthen the context of information these models understand so that they can produce more relevant output? Even going a level deeper, if we're thinking about memory retention, how much information these language models can recall over multiple conversations, over multiple sitting sessions, so they really understand the person, that makes personalization and reading comprehension even more exciting. So for instance, you might have noticed if you have Chat GPT, for instance, in the latest versions, even if you start a new clear chat with the chatbot, it might remember conversations you had 1 or 2 weeks ago in a completely separate chat if you enabled memory retention. So you have context aware analysis, which is looking at the short term working memory. How much can I give it in one go that it remembers? And then you have long term memory retention, where the model is really able to get a comprehensive picture of that student over a longer period of time. Again, risks there include data privacy. How much information is the teacher or the student or the administrator feeding the system that could present security challenges, especially if there's sensitive information being fed there. Two last areas that I'll quickly touch on. One is transparency. So these models are huge. They have millions of different data points or items or features in order for them to make their decisions and their predictions. But if you were to really understand and explain how these language models are able to do what they can be explained in surface level language, but there's this idea of a black box where you really don't know what's going on underneath the hood. We know that they're learning patterns. We know that they're doing next word prediction. So they're just predicting what's likely to be said based on how they know humans speak and communicate. But in terms of the real richness of how they're performing the task and going through decision making processes, we really don't know, which means there's a greater chance of bias. There's a greater chance of them producing false information. There's a greater chance of them hallucinating, just kind of making stuff up as they go on because they aren't super transparent and explainable. And similarly to that, if we're thinking about the ethics and the fairness of that, how does that then affect how we want to implement these tools? If we don't really know how they're making these decisions, if we don't really know where the bias is happening, because some companies won't disclose their actual training data sets or won't disclose the methods that they're using to train their models. How can we really improve these models and evaluate them for the criteria that we care about? So again, these are just some things to keep in mind, but I still think that LLMs, when it comes to personalizing reading comprehension, presents new possibilities like never before. I mentioned earlier in the presentation that I work at the Learning Agency. We're really excited about leveraging AI in a way that is thoughtful and in a way that is responsible. When it comes to personalized reading comprehension, one approach we've been looking at is through open access efforts. So how do we release more data sets or release more algorithms that can be used for personalized reading comprehension? As an example, we ran this competition a couple of years ago where we took a data set of real children's reading passages and reading comprehension question exercises based on those reading passages. And we had a challenge to train an algorithm that could then become its own question generator based on those reading passages. And this could be a way to benchmark the performance of other AI systems and how well they generate quality children's reading comprehension questions. So we're excited to see this area move forward. And we're also excited to share a little bit more about current tools and technologies that are on the market right now, using similar algorithms, using similar approaches to personalize reading comprehension in a way that is conversational and in a way that is interactive and in a way that is data driven. So teachers have the proper insights for intervention and diagnosis, but also in a way that is grounded in the research evidence. So let's talk about some of these tools and some of these key players in the field. So I'm mentioning a few here just because they are the most popular from my understanding. If we're thinking about Khan Academy and their recent Khanmigo tool, if we're thinking about OpenAI and the ways in which teachers are using ChatGPT in the classroom, if we're thinking about very specific ed tech literacy platforms like Project Read and Amira Learning, They are leveraging these large language models to improve user understanding, to understand their learning needs, to understand their learning interests, to understand their personal preferences through natural language conversations. And they're doing this again through that context awareness, being able to retain a lot of information about that learner, and also through these conversational inputs and outputs, focusing on long, open-ended text generation. These tools are also very intentional, at least the ones that are edtech specific, like a Project Read, a Khan Academy, and a Mirror Learning, in making sure that their tools are aligned with the science of learning, thinking about differentiated instruction, thinking about student-centered learning, thinking about real-time feedback and support, and thinking about curriculum alignment as well. So let's dive a little bit more deeply into that. First, I wanted to show Mirror Learning. What makes Mirror Learning really exciting is they have concrete evidence and research data that actually shows they have been able to boost literacy outcomes in a very, very, very impressive way. To take a step back, Mirror is an AI-powered reading tutor that facilitates interactive dialogue aimed at improving reading comprehension. So the first version of Mirror that rolled out was actually focused on improving reading fluency through speech audio. And that is a bit of a foreshadow to our next workshop, in which we'll talk about speech recognition systems and how they connect to reading fluency. But I say that here because that is a key feature of Mirror, where students are able to read out loud and the computer machine can process that audio and interpret it. But their latest version is now leveraging large language models to engage students in live discussions, assess their understanding of a text, and then adjust questions to enhance learning. And they do this through a scaffolded approach. As you can see on this slide, there have been research studies to assess the impact of Mirror on literacy outcomes. And as you can see, it's quite impressive that they've been able to deliver huge growth in literacy, well beyond what is typical in early childhood or early literacy interventions. Next, I wanted to give a quick spotlight to Project Read, another popular AI literacy tool that is looking at large language models to generate stories for teachers that are aligned with their curriculum. So if you go on their website or use their platform, as an educator, you can upload documents related to your curriculum, related to your frameworks, related to your rubrics, and then they have this story generator that can adapt to any scope and sequence and then deliver personalized content for every student. There's even a feature where they can incorporate the student's name, they can incorporate the student's interests, and they can customize vocabulary based on that student's knowledge level. So that personalization, that focus on curriculum alignment, and that flexibility they have seen is a huge time saver for teachers, because now they have this automatic way to generate instructional materials that are curriculum aligned, but can also increase engagement and motivation from students. Luca AI is also similar in the sense that it is using a large language model to generate personalized instructional content. It is more student-facing to my understanding, but this is another example of the ways in which students are able to have an immersive experience where reading is not a standalone single-person activity, but they get to interact with this AI character, Luca. They're able to share more about who they are, like their name, their age, their interest, and then the content becomes personalized so that they have an engaging and relevant experience through that. And so Luca AI is not only able to generate content based on the reader's level and challenges, but they also provide reading recommendations and personalized learning plans based on that child's interest and performance history. I wanted to just give a quick pivot and talk about what these big tech companies are doing. I mentioned how OpenAI, ChatGPT is probably most popular among teachers as a quick way to generate reading comprehension prompts or instructional plans for reading in a way that is interactive and discussion based. We have surveyed other big tech companies, and we've noticed that most haven't developed a specific product narrowly focused on personalizing reading comprehension, except for Microsoft. So just last year in 2024, Microsoft came out with its own reading coach. This is a free tool where learners can co-create their own stories with the reading coach. And so Microsoft has thrown its hat in the ring, and they have mentioned on their website that they're making sure to account for a lot of the issues we had flagged earlier, thinking about privacy, thinking about security, thinking about fairness and inclusiveness, as well as accountability and transparency. That actually reminds me of one point I have forgot to mention earlier. Accountability is going to be really critical here to consider if we're thinking about these tools, because let's say a child experiences harm after interacting with these language models, or let's say a child goes through a negative experience. How can we truly hold these AI machines and technologies accountable? And so there are policy considerations there as well. But overall, as we can see, there are some new and upcoming tools on the market that are creating a bridge between large language models and personalized learning in a way that is grounded in the evidence of literacy activities and literacy achievement. I wanted to spend the next 15 minutes diving into this a little bit more specifically in a way that's more hands-on or illustrative of the ways in which these large language models can efficiently customize reading activities and reading experiences in a way that can be useful for educators, administrators, especially when it comes to the design of intervention strategies. The first thing I wanted to quickly demo, I wanted to focus on one of the more popular chatbots, ChatGPT, and focus on how you could customize ChatGPT to develop interactive discussion frameworks for reading comprehension, leveraging the GPT Builder. I'm not sure how many folks have tried out the GPT Builder for educational applications. If you have, feel free to share your thoughts in the chat. But I wanted to give an example of how, if you use the GPT Builder, you could basically customize a personalized reading tutor that understands at a classroom level the specific interests and needs of the students. I say this keeping in mind and putting a disclaimer of all those limitations and risks we had talked about earlier. The chances of bias, the chances of hallucination, limitations, in that sort. But I thought it would be fun. I took some screenshots because I recognized that one, this is available to those who have a premium subscription to ChatGPT, but I wanted to at least give a visual demo. So I played around with creating one that could be personalized for, let's say, a 10th grade teacher. You can give it a name. I called it Interactive Reading Intelligence for 10th graders. So generates personalized reading comprehension prompts for 10th graders and interactive discussion frameworks. So to create it as a first step, you can directly type into that interface as a prompt, what is the profile of your students? Or maybe you wanted to focus on the struggling readers in your classroom or in your school who are maybe in an intervention program. You can give them a general profile. You can also give them the goals and objectives like I did here. You want to focus on prompts and interactions that enhance inference, vocabulary, summarization, argumentation, open-ended discussion. So in that prompt, you can basically give it priorities for that personalization, right? You can also customize the profile picture if that's something that you want to focus on. But you can go even a step further. You can have conversation starters. And so I found a similar custom GPT called Personalized Reading Comprehension Mastery Tutor that had these conversation starters for a student. Like, I struggle with understanding dense text. Where should I begin? How can I improve my ability to infer meaning from what I read? Can you help me tackle complex comprehension questions? And so these conversation starters will make sure that the chatbot is starting that discussion with the learner at a right starting point. And this is where I feel it becomes empowering for educators, because now they're collaborating with the AI, interacting with the learners, rather than feeling replaced by it or burdened by it, right? And so as a teacher or as a school leader, you have the agency to customize and configure these large language models and these interfaces through natural language input. You don't always need a customized algorithm requiring sophisticated algorithmic code, there are new opportunities to customize these models through interfaces and conversational text. And so that's what we've done here. You'll see here, you can even give it more specific instructions. Like I put here, adapt prompts to match students' reading levels and text complexity, encourage students to explain their reasoning, support opinions with textual evidence, and refine their understanding of key ideas. I even gave it suggestions on tone: warm, encouraging, and engaging. So if you're thinking about struggling readers, or if you're thinking about, maybe you want to think about social emotional learning, just as a thought, if that's something that you value and want to prioritize, there's space to do that here in the configuration. In addition, I mentioned these large language models have a large common knowledge base because they've been trained on massive data across the internet. But you can also extend that knowledge with custom data. And you can do that through these simple interfaces. As an example here, I uploaded a PDF of reading prompt templates. So if you already have templates and frameworks for reading comprehension prompts, you can upload them as files to extend that knowledge so that the chatbot or the language model has a custom knowledge base to base their prompts and their interactive discussion frameworks on. Maybe you want to upload a curriculum material. Maybe you want to upload a rubric. There's space to do that here as well. I just used ChatGPT as an example, but there are other software and tools that, again, allow you to do this customization without requiring super fancy engineering, and just through the traditional, conventional web interfaces that we are used to. So that's the demo on customizing language models through natural language interfaces. Now I wanted to spotlight a specific tool. We're going to go on Conmigo's platform. Their AI coach is trained and was specially designed by a large engineering team for this specific domain when it comes to personalizing the learner's experience. So I wanted to demo this as an alternative approach as well, thinking about market-ready products. And so we're going to go on the Conmigo platform. And here, as you can see, Conmigo has a suite of tools that you can use that extend beyond literacy. But for the purposes of this exercise, I wanted to focus specifically on ways that we could leverage some of these tools for personalizing reading comprehension prompts. I think a good one to start with is this tool here called Make It Relevant. So it's described as linking lesson content to students' lives and interests to boost engagement. And so once you click on that, you'll see here, you're able to input a learning objective. So you could input, let's say, a learning standard, excuse me. In an example I'll share, I gave a Common Core ELA learning strand for fifth graders. You can also give information on the class profile. And then the AI will make recommendations on lesson content and instructional lesson planning based on that information. I already have some saved here, so let me see if I can quickly open that up. In the My Documents tab, I have here as an example, vocabulary building through football themes. So if you have a class and you realize, oh, a lot of them are really interested in football, and I want to connect it to the literacy objective related to vocabulary building, you'll see the AI generated questions. For instance, create an activity where students identify and define football related terms, then use them in sentences that demonstrate their multiple meanings. Or another idea, use football commentary to introduce students to the concept of multiple meaning words and phrases. So there are recommendations of ways in which you, as a teacher, as an educator, can apply these interactive discussion frameworks off of a chatbot interface, but directly in the classroom, which is exciting. Because we do recognize that most learning is happening in the classroom. We aren't advocating a shift of the location of learning from a physical classroom or a digital classroom to a chatbot interface, but we really see these chatbots as tools, as assistants. Another tool that is super helpful that Conmigo has is it has this text leveler. Essentially what it does is it adjusts the complexity of a given text. So let's say that you have 10th grade reading material that you wanted to adjust for a student because they were at an 8th grade reading level or a 9th grade reading level. You can input that original text here, select the desired new reading level, and then the AI basically updates that text and generates new output, read leveling that reading material for the targeted grade level. I have an example of that here. In the theme of football, keeping that theme going, what I asked it to do was I took an ESPN article on the latest Super Bowl game, the latest Super Bowl win. I'm kind of based in Philadelphia, so I'm a little biased. Go Eagles. That's why I wanted to use this as an example. But I took this ESPN article and I asked it to basically adapt it for a 5th grade reading level. And you can see it does that here. I'll also flag you are able to make direct edits. And this is a principle we like to advocate, human AI collaboration, where you don't necessarily have to let the AI do all the work. Although it is efficient and although it is more scalable, we want to empower educators. So if they're able to modify the outputs of the AI, give it specific instructions, that's where we really feel we can optimize and maximize literacy outcomes through human AI collaboration. So I can make direct edits to the text here, but this is just an example of another way in which you can leverage this technology to adapt materials and personalize learning in intervention strategies. 2 more tools, and then I'll quickly wrap up. Conmigo also has another tool called a question generator. And essentially what this tool does is it creates questions, recommendations of questions for a specific piece of content. And so the reason why this can connect to personalized reading comprehension strategies, again, if we're thinking about presenting instructional content in a way that is student-centered or differentiated or aligned with that learner's interests and preferences. Let's say there's a struggling reader in your classroom who can't or maybe is struggling to increase their motivation for reading. If you learn more about the types of materials that they like, maybe they want to read about ballet, maybe they're really interested in history, then you're able to input those texts and then it recommends, the AI, the Conmigo AI system recommends questions based on that specific piece of content. So I'll show an example here where I took that same ESPN article and it recommended reading comprehension questions based on the article. Lastly, I want to talk about another tool called discussion prompts. And if we're thinking about interactive discussion frameworks where students have a chance to engage with their peers or with their instructors as they are reading and as they are gaining these key literacy skills, the discussion prompts tool is another great example of ways to leverage AI to make that happen. So the discussion prompts tool leverages AI to craft engaging prompts to stimulate meaningful classroom discussions. So in the theme of, let's say, football, and I'll show it later. Let's say you wanted to continue on that theme of the Super Bowl or thinking about sports journalism. You can select the grade level, you can select the topic, and then it crafts engaging prompts based on those inputs and those instructions that you gave it. So if I go back to my Documents tab, I'll pull open the example that came up of I used the topic diverse viewpoints in sports journalism. And you'll see here, the AI is able to make recommendations on discussion topics related to sports journalism. And so these can be interwoven into those reading comprehension questions that were generated earlier. So it becomes this dynamic multifaceted experience for the classroom to engage in something they're already excited about, but in a way that allows them to grow in their reading and in their literacy, and to also improve in their critical thinking as well. And so this is just an overview of that Conmigo. It also has a chatbot interface to directly interact, or an AI coach to directly interact with learners. But I hope that this demo at least shows the wide range of possibilities with these language models. They can help educators when it comes to thoughtfully planning instruction, when it comes to generating instructional materials, and they can also be useful in the actual learning experience for the student. And teachers, administrators, school leaders have the ability to train, to customize, and to guide these language models in how they interact with their students. So to quickly recap, 3 key takeaways I would like you to have leaving this workshop. 1, we've come a long way in leveraging AI for personalized reading assistance. It has advanced from basic search engines and basic information filtering on what a user clicked or pressed the like button for, to now we have these advanced recommendation systems and these large language models that are able to store, remember, and reason about massive amounts of data. And they can collect personal data in real time through conversation. There are emerging market products, if we're thinking about Conmigo, Amira 2.0, Luca AI, and even ChatGPT, who are able to offer personalized and interactive reading experiences in a way that can be aligned with the research evidence when it comes to literacy achievement. And they can be done in a way where teachers feel supported rather than isolated. They can collaborate and work with these AI tools to further individualize the learning experience. And this becomes a huge time-saving tool for teachers, but also allows them to adapt their instruction to meet the unique needs of each student and enhance overall educational outcomes. So that's an overview of where we are currently in leveraging language models for interactive reading intelligence. If you would like more information, I have my contact information up here. I'll also do a quick plug that our next workshop is going to focus more on automatic speech recognition. So less about the text and natural language inputs through a chatbot interface, and more about reading fluency through actual audio in which a human can interact with a machine. And that will take place on March 12th. And with that, I'll pass it back to you, Agueda.